If you don't know the field, don't let fluent language feel like solid ground.
In classic search, humans did the heavy cognitive lifting of comparing sources, right? What psychological muscles do we risk by doing this, like allowing this, when a machine handles the evaluation, selection, and summarization of us?
The old way, the 2025 way, had at least some friction building, which is a good thing from my point of view. Now, when you're presented with just one answer, well, you don't have that friction any longer.
How do I recognize what I don't know? You know, the simple answer to that is that's really difficult. If you don't have expertise in an area, you need to be very mindful of any answers that are given to you, whether they're given to you by search engines, whether they're given to you by humans, or, you know, even people that you trust and know.
When convenience mass construction, how does a user build an internal alarm system to recognize what has been intentionally or systematically left out of a summary, for example?
Remember, it's just a machine. You know, it's an advanced, it's a useful, it's an impressive machine, but it's still just a machine. It doesn't have judgment, doesn't have responsibility, doesn't have understanding in the human sense. It calculates the statistically significant answer, which can be extremely valuable, but that should not be mistaken for authority. So, you know, we should use AI with both curiosity and cool-headedness. Not as an oracle, not as a colleague in the human sense, but as a tool that can extend our thinking if we continue to think ourselves. Because, you know, the machine can answer, but the human must answer for it.
Hello to everyone. Today we have a special podcast episode in regards to tracing the macro shift from raw directories to synthesized AI realities by exploring how the mechanics of search alter human consciousness. So I have two important guests here with me, Kaare and Just. Hello and welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Can you please tell us, be really short, something about you for those who doesn't know you yet, guys, please?
As you can see, Mirela, we're both two very polite gentlemen who always let the other party go first. But on a serious note, then when I don't participate in your very fine podcasts here, I'm a professor with the Business Academy Copenhagen, which is one of the larger universities of applied science in Denmark. There I manage a couple of e-business bachelor degrees, and I'm very interested in this subject of artificial intelligence, and I'm sort of currently trying to use a lot of time to get my head around what it means and how we should respond to it.
Well, the short version is that I've been an IT consultant and trainer for half of my life. I'm originally from the media industry, so when I started teaching, it was about Photoshop and then the web and then online marketing. Nowadays, it's mainly about AI, but as I've been doing marketing for many years, I've been looking very much forward to this episode because it's really connecting some of those dots, and especially the human perspective to it, because it really does affect the humans. But I am sure we'll get to that.
Yeah, sure. So let's get started. I have a first question for Just. Of course, my dear Just, you were talking about the fact that we have moved from search as navigation, which are directories and links, to search as interpretation, as synthesized answers. In classic search, humans did the heavy cognitive lifting of comparing sources, right? What psychological muscles do we risk by doing this, like allowing this, when a machine handles the evaluation, selection, and summarization of us?
Well, definitely, and that's one of the things to ponder in this time and age. When we talk about search in Denmark, that means searching, you know, via Google, and there's other search platforms in other parts of the world. But in Google searches, in the old ways, you know, the ones that are so 2025 now, then we were presented with a list of pages, and we still sort of had to do the manual selection of picking what link to choose. We had to do a small but an active action there. And now with the AI summaries that dominate search, then we don't even have to do that. We're just presented with a synthesized version of what the sources they say. And one way sort of to put it here is that if Google was giving us access to this information superhighway, so if it gave us the roads, then now something like Google AI search is giving us directions. It's becoming in our cars the little navigator that tells us where to go. But what we have to remember is we still need to decide where we're going, and we still need to be mindful of traffic. We still need to, avoid, even if the navigator in our car is telling us to take that route. If there's a big sign that says, road closed, we don't proceed. This, of course, being the analogy to it. So I think we need to remember that we still bear the consequences of the usage of the information that we find.
Thank you. Well, building on this shift, when an AI gives a single defined authoritative paragraph instead of 10 blue links like we are used to see, right? Or to receive as such, it creates an immediate sense of certainty. How does this structural shift from the classical CEO to GEO alter our metacognition, the very way we think about and question our own thoughts?
It depends on the person for a start. But the starting point, at least from where I see it, is that the old way, the 2025 way, had at least some friction built in, which is a good thing from my point of view, because you can choose to go down one path, you can choose to go down another path. You'll spend some time evaluating what is trustworthy or what you already recognize. You have reasons for selecting what is right for you. And you might choose the first link, you might choose the third one, you might go back the first one, you might look at the other results and really qualify your decision. Now, when you're presented with just one answer, well, you don't have that friction any longer. And for some generations, like mine, I will have a certain critical sense to whether or not I could trust that answer. And I might choose to go further down and search for other sources or ask in a different way or use additional tools. I guess that other generations might have a different approach. And I hope that we will succeed in building in some friction, because if there's no friction and if we cannot even trust the answer, we're not in a so good path. And I mean, there can be so many reasons why the answer might not be trustworthy, but it might appear very trustworthy. So our critical sense really has to be sharpened even further. And there's a lot more to that story, but then again, I know that you have much more to say, and I have as well, but just in short.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to mention something very important for those who don't know yet about GEO. GEO means Generative Engine Optimization. So just for those who doesn't know what we are talking about, so they can connect some dots afterwards during our talk, because otherwise it doesn't have sense for many others. So thank you, Kaare. So you notice that the danger isn't simply that AI is biased, right? We have talked, me and you, a lot about this, but this bias, it's hidden inside an incredible convenient answer. When convenience mass construction, how does a user build an internal alarm system to recognize what has been intentionally or systematically left out of a summary, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think your question here, Mirela, it's a fantastic question. It goes straight to the heart of what critical thinking is, because essentially you're asking, how do I recognize what I don't know? And the simple answer to that is that's really difficult. If you don't have expertise in an area, you need to be very mindful of any answers that are given to you, whether they're given to you by search engines, whether they're given to you by humans, or even people that you trust and know. You can't what an answer is within a field you don't have expertise in, and your internal alarm system, if anything, should simply be an awareness of that. And sometimes what humans do is we use a heuristic. If we can't evaluate something, if we don't know if a lawyer is a good lawyer, because we don't know the law, he knows the law, then we look at what if he's well dressed, and if he's immaculately dressed, well, he must be a fantastic lawyer. If we don't know if a politician, is competent, we looked at, if she's really caring about, the people, and if she's really caring, she must be a great politician, right? It doesn't necessarily follow, but that's the heuristics that we use sometimes to substitute our lack of knowledge. We assess something else, and then we apply that assessment over into it. And with AI is very good at making fluent texts, isn't it? It writes so compelling.
Yeah.
And then we take the compellingness of the text and we say, well, if it's written compelling and very self-assured, it must be correct, mustn't it?
Yeah.
But that's not the case. So that's the alarm clock. The alarm clock should tell you the lower expertise that you have, the more you should be wary of arriving at a quick conclusion. If you don't know the field, don't let fluent language feel like solid ground.
Wow, that's really correct. Thank you for sharing this, Houston.
Well, sono giusto, as they say in Italian, right?
Mr. Kaare, you work deeply within AI governance and trust, right? So traditional search engines, as we have also mentioned earlier, felt relatively stable and objective as well. But AI outputs are completely fluid again.
Yes.
How do we trust or audit a digital ecosystem when the ranking changes dynamically based on system prompts, hidden safety filters, and the precise mood of a prompt?
It's not simple. But then again, I guess that's the reason why we talk about this. Because, we're really navigating towards a black box. And we don't know for sure what happens inside that black box. It might be that we could ask the better question, and it might be that we can ask for sources, and it might be that we can look down on other sources or whatever. But the initial answer is from the black box. If we compare it to the 2025 version, where I could see that it was from the government, or it was from an interest organization, or it was from a private company, whatever player, at least I had a chance of understanding whether it had a certain bias in a certain direction. And the answer that we get now from the AI summary probably has a bias as well. It's just harder to know where does that bias come from, because that bias might indeed be different depending on whether it's from a state or a private company and whatever. And in the case of Google, let's start there. It is, after all, an American company. They make their money on advertising, which means that they are probably in favor, at least to some extent, of their big advertisers. As it is an American company, it might have an American view of the world. And as long as we understand the rules of the game, I guess we can navigate. But sometimes it's complex to understand those rules. For my part, I will sometimes choose another service. If I'm choosing a Microsoft service, well, then it is a different company serving different customers for different reasons. If I go down a Chinese service or whatever service, they all have their starting point. But in the search, at least in the Danish market, well, Google is the big player. And, well, I hope we can trust them. I really, really hope.
Well, with hope we don't go far away. So that's just saying.
Well, then again, I'm so happy that we're having this dialogue, because
Me
it
too.
probably takes
That's the
more.
whole point. My dearest Just, so you actually brought up a profound human behavior angle, which I liked it very much. If an AI mentions 5 companies, those 5 companies become the perceived market, right? If it gives 3 examples, those becomes the user's mental map. So how do creators, leaders prevent their cognitive boundaries from being restricted by an engine's limited selection at this point, I wonder?
Yeah, I wonder that myself. I think, we could go into the research by Professor Daniel Kahneman on how to de-bias yourself. And I think his main point of view is we should simply remember we will always have a bias, and it's not malicious, it's not ill-natured. It's simply, we as humans, we have this tendency to want to simplify the world. And sometimes simplifications, are good. If immediate action is required,
Sometimes complicated instead. Let me say it.
Exactly. I mean, sometimes we just need to go fast, and then we shouldn't think slow. But other times, we need to stop up and think whether we're going in the right direction. and then you sort of need to recognize that what you're presented by an AI, that is just a fragment of reality. It is the fragment that has been favored by the algorithm, by the system prompt, by the data that's been put into that system. And I think the big mistake here is to forget that that's what's happening. That is what's happening. And I mean, very low practical. I mean, if you get a list of 5 companies, ask for 5 more. I mean, just be aware that just because you're just getting 5 hits, that's not the 5 that there are. And so I think, we just have to search for what's been forgotten and not imagine that all we see is all that there is.
True, very true. In regards to this, these systems are mainly trained on historical human data, right? Meaning they inherit and amplify past biases. If high achievers use AI to make forward-looking strategic choices, how do they avoid trapping their business decisions in a loop of historical human mistakes at this point?
Short answer, there's a much longer version, is by proper prompting. But proper prompting, if it is directly in Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever all these services are called, you can also add a document and you can give it access to your mailbox or your calendar or other things. For my part, when I use Copilot the way that I use in my work environment, at least it has a framing in my work environment. That game is different in a search engine. And in the search engine, at least the traditional one, I would sometimes do a fairly short search, but at least I would add that it should be free, or it should be Danish, or it should be high quality, or whatever. And in traditional search, often, if you add more words, more precision, you'll get a better answer. I think in the age of AI search results, you should probably train yourself in asking the longer question in order to guide the service in a certain direction. Because if the short answer from 2025 would give you a lot of options and you could reflect, well, now that friction is gone, if you put the friction in your own prompting, at least that is your chance of getting a better result. But then again, there's more to it. But I guess that prompting is key in this aspect. Really putting a lot of words, a lot of context. And in the case of Google, I mean, I'm most of the time logged into my Google account, so it already, in that aspect, knows something about how I use Gmail or YouTube or whatever services. So it really already tries to serve me, but that might not be the good thing, because sometimes I would like to see it from a different
What is the
perspective.
cost? What is the cost? Is it? Let's be honest.
It is really, I mean, avoiding friction is also sometimes avoiding reflection, and I don't like that part of it.
You don't like it, but exists.
True, and sometimes I'll really take an old-fashioned book or whatever, talk to a really human being instead of just using machines. So I guess there are ways to do it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take Just at this point. Just let's look at the timeline. Each kind of phone books, Google links, synthesized answers, right? Nowadays. So a search moves closer to our internal cognitive processing. Is the technology simply reflecting the human information needs today, or is it actively constructing a new type of human consciousness? I'm pretty curious.
Well, I mean, I guess we all are, because I mean, this there's this talk about, is human consciousness changing? Has it changed over the last 1,000 years? I belong to the people who believe that we are conscious-wise much the same as we were millennia ago. And the human animal that we've been over the centuries has always sought shortcuts. We always wanted to make things easier. And if we go back to, say, the Middle Ages, when the majority of the population was illiterate, well, instead of writing, we used logos. The reason that we have sort of old inns called the Blue Swan was because they had a painting of a blue swan. And then when people walked by, they said, oh, that's the blue swan. That must be the blue swan that my neighbor was talking about where he wanted us to meet up. So we always use heuristics to convey, to simplify information. I mean, some people would argue that religion is that, but that's a deeper topic. Let's not go there. And I think what's happening that might be different is that the information available to us is increasing exponentially, and that challenges our brain that wants these simple shortcuts because it's getting unmanageable. We had phone books, and that provided us with the list of names. Then we got Google, it provided us with the links. And now we get AI that's giving us just a fluence, and this is the answer to what you want. This is the meaning, yeah? And there's always been sort of ways of trying to affect that information. I mean, if companies, they wanted to be found in the phone book, what did they do? They chose a name that began with the letter A. And I mean, that old hack, that old SEO optimization trick, it still exists. 10% of all large companies in the US begin with the letter A. Why? Because then they get first in an alphabetical listing. And with SEO, there were some tricks, and Kaare and myself, we know most of them on how to get mentioned, and a lot of those seem to apply to geo, to how to get found by the AI. So we just have to remember again, sort of that the information that we're getting there is a shortcut, but it's a shortcut that some people have affected for us. And as humans, we always wanted and desired these shortcuts, but with new technology, those shortcuts are presented to us in a clear, nice voice that we can accept without making any effort. Yeah.
But in the end, it's not quite about that we as humans, we don't have to do any efforts to achieve or obtain something from an AI. AI still needs our hands and brains and human touch as such, etc., etc. This is my personal opinion. I don't think an AI can, again, as I mentioned earlier, AI added data in place of historical data and current data, right? So, I mean, it's still trained in regards to humanity as such. So, just saying.
And I mean, Kaare was making a fine point earlier, I think, in saying that we should always remember, who created the code, who affected it, who owns it, yeah? And I keep coming back to this great quote from Kathy O'Neill, that algorithms are just opinions embedded in code. And we have to remember that when we're searching on Google and we get this great fluent answer, that that looks great, but who and how who decided that it got to look like that?
Besides just those 4 big companies, power companies, and that's it. Not us for sure. I'm just saying, again, I'm taking my full responsibility.
Well, I mean, this would be the big reveal of your show if you said, actually, it's me, right?
My dear Kaare, when a machine answers with absolute confidence, but zero actual awareness, because we just kind of talked about that earlier, it creates that cognitive echo, right? So how does continuous exposure to this hyper-confident synthetic voices alter a leader's tolerance for nuance, complexity, and healthy disagreement in real life?
I think that the best decisions are made by really reflecting on those decisions, getting some overview, getting some information, getting some perspective. So far, so good. But it has been the case for, well, basically generations, that sometimes you would choose the other approach. Take your time. I mean, back in the days, people would go to the church and at least be in the quiet place for a certain time. And nowadays, it's possible to do meditation, and it is possible to sit down and read a book, and it is possible to have a talk with an actual human being. And I think that if we rely too much on machines delivering very fast results, very efficient results that might seem trustworthy but might not really be, we will miss out something. And in that aspect, I'm overall actually quite optimistic about our human race, because it seems that during the years there have always been counter reaction where something has become too strong. I mean, when the word was all put out from the church, there would be someone in a position to that. If a certain political voice or a certain company or whatever, there will be some opposition. And the thing is, if we take Google as an example, it's not the only search engine, it's not the only player on this market. Well, Google will also have to earn our trust. Google was not always the biggest search engine. It is not the only one. And if Google doesn't serve us well enough, there are alternatives out there. So as long as Google delivers good enough results, and maybe also giving traditional results apart from the AI overview, we can continue down that path. But Microsoft is ready with their search engine. The Chinese are ready with their search engines, and search engines is not the only thing. It's a main topic in this exact episode, and there's a lot to talk about. But I mean, we don't need to depend on these companies. And I basically think that we shouldn't. As long as they serve us well, we will use them, but we should have alternatives. And I hope it will continue that way.
Just in regards to this, because they are kind of connected, what I have in my mind right now as well, you raised a really brilliant question on our previous personal conversation. How do we stay authentic and reflective when our communication is optimized for algorithm selection, right? Do you foresee a literal split in the market where creators write raw content exclusive for humans and synthetic content exclusively for machines? Because with me and you, we talk so much about this. I'm curious.
We did, and I think my reflection on the talk is that this split occurred 15 years ago. Because I mean, we already have. When I train e-commerce developers, well, they're trained to write structured metadata, data that goes into the HTML code, but which is never shown to the user on the homepage, which is shown in the Google previews, which is only read by the bots scanning that homepage. And I think sort of what's changing now is that it used to be, I think it's a question that the balance of power is shifting here. It used to be that the metadata was what spoke to the machine, but what's happening now is that the body text is also beginning to talk to the machine, and that's a different thing. And I think sort of we touched upon earlier, Kaare, that there was some things that were similar between geo search optimization and the old SEO search optimization, and then there were some things that are different. And one of the things that seemed to be different is that in search optimization, a lot of the optimization happened on your own page, right? But now with the geo, we see this thing that the answer that's presented about you becomes the average of what everybody on the web is writing about you. And one fantastic example of that, Mirela, that I heard the other day was one of the companies that are part of the Precise group. Well, they found out that their competitors, and they had roughly 5 or 6 competitors, they were all doing a product comparison, versus their products. And this is normal in the industry. You do that in order to capture search results that are for the other company. But all of the competitors had made the same mistake. They had described that the product from this company in the Precise group, they had a feature that the product didn't have. So the AI is looking at this and saying, okay, I have 5 sources saying they got this feature, and then I got 1 source, their own homepage, saying they don't have this feature. Well, 5 out of 6. The statistically probable answer is that they have it. And I think that the interesting twist to this story is that the CEO of that company there, he thought about it and he said it would actually be really logical if we had that feature. We should have this feature. So he sent his programmers to do a weekend's work where they created that feature, and now they have it. So problems can be complex, solutions should be simple, I guess. Come back to this. I think we are writing a lot to the machines, and I think that will only get more so.
Traditionally, Google, regards to what also you were saying earlier, used EEAT, right, to rank real human creators. In a GE world, where AI mapping bots summarizing our content, how can a truly vulnerable, authentic human message preserve its soul so it doesn't get flattened into a generic algorithm summary?
It really starts out from kind of putting another layer of complexity on top. In the days of the EA, the experience, the expertise, the authoritativeness, the trustworthiness, so far so good. And in the age of search engine optimization or SEO, at least during the years where I taught it, I would always say, yes, we optimize for a machine, but first of all, we optimize for humans. Because if a human enters your page and does not like what he or she sees, well, they will leave the page and you will not have your result. So, we optimize for humans first, then we optimize for the machine to find it in order to present it with the human. And now we put the next layer of complexity on top. What we put on top in part is that we put lived experience on top. Before it was about experience as a whole. Now it's about the lived experience. And before it was about the expertise, but now it should be hyper-specific content. It should also be about the ethical weight in order to really match the person searching. And in the earlier days, there was a certain level of content. The more content you presented, the more likely it was that you could be one of the attractive results if you were connecting it all together. And now it's even easier to produce content, and a lot of content is produced, which means that the machine will have to process it all, which means that the human could ask for something much more specific, which means that all these dynamics change. So we really put layers on top. The very short version, but that's only the very short version, is that if we can present on our page a question and an answer, well, the machine will say, well, that's great, because that was exactly the question that the user was asking, and I think that your answer would be a good one. But it doesn't work that way, because the machines don't want to be fooled, and the humans don't want to be fooled by the machines. So it is still about really producing content, relevant content, because that's the only way to win the game. That was the case in the age of search engine optimization, and it's really still the case.
Just if companies realize that AI agents only recommend brands that fits specific data criteria, right? Corporate writing will naturally become highly engineered for machines. What happens to the art of strategic storytelling, which I love, and creative human expression then?
Well, obviously, as Kaare said, it gets pushed, and I think the challenge here is simply to forget that the challenge is to simply remember that it should still be there. A strong. I think maybe we shouldn't confuse optimization with communication. That would be one way to put it, yeah? Because we want to be found, and that's what the machine helps us with. But what people find, the end actors that we want to take action are still humans, mostly. And I think, that's changing once we get AI agents that search the web for us. But that's a debate for 2027 or 2028, isn't it? Right now, I think we still have to remember that there is something called creative storytelling. And it's not a formula, it's a choice with a voice.
I agree. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. By the way, since we were talking about all this, this is exactly what you and your team built the behavioral security layers, which is BSL, right? To peer inside this black box of AI, which is kind of a nervous system of AI, right? And it reads inside the internal tension of or intent before it becomes a flat output. How does having a framework like BSL allow leaders and companies as well to maintain a strategic control and cognitive clarity when the rest of the corporate world is just trying to please a large language model?
Thank you for asking, because it's true. Together with Nikolai and our other team members, we're building this service, and we're really building it basically to protect human beings. And in order to protect human beings, we should help protecting the LLM systems. Because the thing is that the greatest risk today is not data leaks as such, at least in the AI age. It is if the model starts a behavioral drift, and if it drifts in a certain direction, and if you're not aware that it drifts in a certain direction, well, you're not that good off, because you start by trusting the service, you start by getting good answers. Little by little, it gives different answers, but you don't really realize that it's drifting. And the reason why it's drifting might be that bad actors really inject the service and start affecting the internal way those services work, which is totally complex. But and Nikolai noticed a lot about it. I know it from an overall perspective. But what I do know is that as long as we can at least identify that it drifts, we can give a heads up. We can basically turn on the traffic light and say, well, it's not green any longer, it's yellow, or it might even be red. And maybe it's time for you to stop that process. It's really time to make sure that you get back to the stable level. And it's not about shielding the service. It's really about protecting that you don't get fooled by a service drifting in a certain direction. And I mean, by now, we really invented it because the need is so big, and we haven't found anyone else doing it, which is kind of strange. But then again, I guess that will be our contribution together, of course, with other people doing other great things. And we really try to protect the service so that service can protect the humans that are using the service. And we're quite optimistic that we can do that contribution on a start by an enterprise level, because it has a certain price tag, but it might triple down the market at a later point. That remains to be seen. But we'll start in the enterprises.
Me and you, we also share live panel events, AI and human future. From an organizational trust standpoint, if a company completely mechanizes its outward messaging to safety future search agents, what is the hidden cost to its internal culture and alignment?
That can be so big, and that can really be frightening. Because, I mean, once you cannot trust what the company is answering, once you cannot trust what how an organization is behaving, well, you're not that good off. And if that's due to people behaving in a certain way, well, there will be a consequence at some point for certain people. That might be that they should leave the organization at some point, or they might be sent to jail, or whatever will happen. But if it's because of an IT service, an AI service that serves that organization, it can be much harder to pinpoint where did this all arise from. And I mean, if people are using these services and they are in good faith that they really get relevant answers, and it so happens that little by little it starts drifting, and little by little they cannot trust, well, that might affect numbers of employees in an organization. It might affect an even a number of customers. And I mean, if they cannot even see that something is drifting, well, then not that good off. So it's really about protecting the organization so that organization can protect other players, customers, or whatever people interacting with that organization, because we don't want to risk that black box moving in a direction and really moving a lot of people without them even being aware.
Your core message for this episode is beautifully profound. You
Well, I
were
can only
saying,
disappoint now, right?
no, exactly. Be careful, Petas. You're saying the future of search is not only about how we find information, right? But it is about how information finds and shape us. Wow, I thought this is really incredible because I completely agree with you. Can you please unpack the psychological difference between actively searching for truth versus allowing a curated algorithm flow to shape our personal reality?
I'll give it my best shot. And I think I come back to this, one of the main points in the research of Professor Kahneman, which is that as humans, we struggle to understand randomness. Professor Kahneman, he related a story in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, about how he, as a young officer, he was called in the army, and he was asked sort of, there were two squadrons. One of the squadrons, they half of the pilots were dead and they failed all their missions. The other, no losses, they completed all of them. And the question given to him was, what went wrong with the second squad? And his answer was to look his colonel in the eye and says, look, one squadron was lucky, the other was unlucky, because they got the same training. They were assigned missions as random. So one of them had a good dice roll and the other didn't. I mean, a morbid example. But the point is that as humans, we struggled with historically to understand that sometimes things just happen random. And that comes back to one of the features of generative AI is the variance, the randomness of it. And why exactly do I get this answer? Kaare gets that answer. If I ask again, I get a third answer. Well, it's the randomness of it all, right? And randomness has always been a challenge for humans. It's been a challenge for us, in our interactions with other humans. If I run into somebody at a bar, I think, oh, fate must have meant for us to meet. Yeah, but it wasn't fate. It was chance, and maybe it was a good chance, and maybe things worked out. But we have to remember that every answer we get from an AI is a random encounter. Yeah, and I think sort of we have to just remember that there is the signal that we're trying to locate, and then there's the noise. Yeah, the randomness, and I think sort of what you're talking about, what you're asking about, Mirela, is again critical thinking, and if critical thinking gives us the knowledge,
that's why I push all the time, and I push it.
Critical thinking, Mirela, if you say that critical thinking should give us the knowledge that there is randomness, there is the noise, but there's also the truth, the signal that we're looking for.
Exactly.
Hopefully, it should also give us the wisdom to try to distinguish between what's what. But I mean, that's a story of personal development, isn't it?
Yes, indeed, exactly. Thank you. Exactly. You often talk about breaking out of the digital echo chamber. Why does the human brain feel so comfortable inside a synthetic echo chamber? And what biological or psychological vulnerabilities make us naturally defer to the machine's worldview?
Humans are often in doubt, which could actually be a good thing. Because if you're in doubt, you will search for an answer, and at some point you will find it, and there might be a process to getting there. If we start out from the doubt, if you start out from the vulnerability, if you start out from basically human flaws, which once again might sound like a negative thing, but it really isn't, and you are presented by an answer from a machine which does not include doubt. The machine is so self-assured that it is confident it has the right answer, and it even directs it in a direction that seems compatible with your way of seeing the world, your way of thinking. Well, you're so easily convinced that that is a good answer, but it might not be. So the thing is that if we can build in doubt in the systems, we can much better reflect. But if we don't succeed in building in doubt in the systems, well, we might be presented by something that we don't doubt, but we should.
Yes, well, a fast answer satisfy our immediate need for efficiency, right? At least in a professional point of view, but they can destroy our long-term curiosity as humans. How can high-performing professionals consciously cultivate deep, slow, critical thinking in a corporate environment that demands hyper-fast, clear-cut answers?
I think this comes back to what Kaare was talking about just before, that sort of there's this perception about sort of that AI, it provides us with easy access to easy knowledge, yeah. And if we have access to anything at our fingertips, why remember anything at all? Why memorize something? Why not just ask the AI every time I get a question? But there's a trap, because in order to interpret, in order to understand, in order to evaluate the answers that come up from the AI, well, we need to memorize something. So again, I think AI pushes us into making a more conscious choice than we ever made before about what we need to know, about what is mission critical for us. AI can, let us, access things that are not vital to our core mission easily. And if we don't need to have it as part of a core, well, fine, great. Maybe the level doesn't need to be that high. So basically, we're forced into making a choice about who we want to be, and we're forced into making that choice at an earlier age. And this is us coming back to the last time we had a talk, Mirela. I think this is something that challenges some people.
Some people, yeah. Thank you for
Well,
specifying
and I should be careful of what I say, because
yeah.
Kaare, you made the point before that we humans are always in doubt. Well, Nietzsche would say that there's a certain type of humans that are always in doubt, and then there's a certain type of humans that are not always in doubt. And he used some choice words for that distinction, which I will not repeat. But I think, he may have had a point. And does everybody want to be in doubt always? How does that feel? That feels horrible. It must be so great to be so assured of yourself, right? And so we're down as humans. Sometimes we need assurance. Sometimes we don't need everything to be difficult. So again, AI, in the most positive light I could say this, is that AI forces us to make a choice about where we should be in doubt and where we should just take it easy. But the choice, is still there. If everything can be looked up, we need to be sharper about what must be learned.
I completely agree with you, Just. When we talk about taking conscious leadership out of our lives, we have to look at our daily digital behavior, right? How does a leader measure their own digital sovereignty?
The short answer is that if you can make your choices without that kind of tools, well, it's much more likely that it is really your own thoughts. Because the ultimate red flag for a leader is really, I would call it linguistic colonization. If your own internal thought processes, if your own strategic frameworks, if your vocabulary little by little and silently transforms into those bulleted structures of an AI output, and if you cannot even tell where it came from without prompting, well, that strategy is no longer yours. So if a human can say the words by him or herself, do their own thoughts, do their own questions, do their own doubts, whatever, we're in a much better position. The risk is really that we somehow get hijacked because it seems so trustworthy, it seems so true, it seems so thought through, but the thought is really not ours. And I guess I'm so much in favor of using these tools, but not only using these tools. Humans are still humans, and they are tools. They should not define our thinking. They should be helpful tools, no problem about that. But once we go offline, we should be able to present that strategy offline. Otherwise, it's really not our own thought any longer.
Well, it's also kind of related to our past life event that we have had in relationship
sure.
to education, if
Yeah,
you
exactly.
recall, because you were there, both of you guys. So just as a reminder, you can repeat for others who haven't had the opportunity to see our previous life event, AI in education, that there are so many really, really good points. I'm not just saying to raise the algorithm, YouTube algorithm, so let's go there and see our live event. But I think that since this panel of which you are, both of you guys, you are there, it's so incredible powerful because there are so many of you there to expose yourself, but also expose your knowledge and informations that's so high value into those informations that everyone, and I mean everyone, has to know them, at least know them, not quite understand them fully because it takes time. It's a process, of course, obviously. But in order for everyone to have more clear vision and ideas and remove some of those doubts, it's like a veil, then go for it because it really makes sense to give it a try, a shot. Yeah, definitely.
And it is such a good point, and because the three of us, we have a certain lived experience, and we have done a lot of thoughts and a lot of dialogue and research and whatever independently of these tools, which means that we start out at least from our own lived experience. But if we put these tools in the hands of the youngest generations, well, they have a different starting point. And we should really make sure that we protect that
agree.
young generation, because they might not have the same critical sense as us.
I agree very much, Kaare. And I think, there's this term that's being thrown about that the generation alpha, the young generation, they are digital natives. I think that's so beyond it. They are digitally exposed.
You offered a highly practical framework using AI as a dialogue partner rather than an oracle, explicitly asking it for alternatives, missing perspectives, counter arguments, and uncertainty. Can you please give us a live example of how a leader can frame a prompt to force an AI to expose its own hidden assumptions?
It's a great question, Mirela. I think a leader could write, I'm considering this decision, insert decision here. First, give me your best advice, then list 5 assumptions your advice is based on. List 5 assumptions I'm likely to bring into question myself. 3 perspectives we may both be interlooking, 2 strong counter arguments, and then 1 situation where your advice would be directly wrong. As an example. But I think this is the point that I think is important to remember here, is that we should not only try to expose the AI's hidden assumptions, because we have hidden assumptions ourselves as well. And I think AI, it's a mirror. It's a reflection.
I agree.
And what happens when we use an AI is it looks at the words and it says, okay, statistically, what words are likely to be a response to this based on the data that I've been trained on? Boop, boop, boop. It builds that up. But it's a reflection of the words that we use. And one very practical exercise I always do in my courses, that's a course where I ask an AI, I ask Google Translate to translate the Danish phrase, my dearest, min kæreste, into English. And the word is usually translated, min kæreste, as either boyfriend or girlfriend, depending on the gender. Because in English, if you have somebody that's very dear to your heart, it's important for us to know, is that a man or is it a woman? But, in Denmark, we were woke before woke came up. So our word for a boyfriend or girlfriend is gender neutral. But that means we force the translation software to make a choice. And then, I do this exercise where I ask the AI, I ask my students to put different words, saying my dearest is strong. Well, then it becomes a boyfriend. My dearest is beautiful. It becomes a girlfriend. My dearest is a programmer. It becomes a boyfriend. My dearest is an actress. Poor choice of words in the US translation. Well, my dearest is a nurse. Then it becomes a girlfriend. And you keep making sort of these correlations because the words are gendered in their statistical correlations. And whenever we prompt something, we have to be very mindful of the correlations that we are using in our prompt that we are not aware of ourselves. And that's what I mean by that AI is a reflection of ourselves. It is much a mirror where we get to reflect in our own biases. Because, I mean, AI has blind spots, that's an obvious point, but less obvious points is so do we all. And a good prompt should look for both.
What are your personal practical strategy to break out of the digital echo chamber? How do you intentionally disrupt that personalization and tracking algorithm to ensure you are seeing a raw, unfiltered view of your reality?
Thank you for asking, because I really put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah, well, I know.
Yeah. Well, I practice what I call myself algorithmic arbitrage, but I'll put in a few more words to what I mean by that. I will often take the output from one large language model and feed it into a competitor, and really instruct that competing service to tear the logic apart and expose hidden system biases. I also prompt in the reverse. I rarely ask for quick answers. I really force the AI to make me creative in clarifying answers to stress test my own premise. And that means that I will do the prompt asking it to ask me questions, and I answer those questions. And as I answer those, I might ask it to do another round of questions and answers, because that way around, I have the chance of reflecting. I have the chance of directing it in my way. I have the chance to ask it to be the devil's advocate or whatever I wanted to ask it for, because I'm part of the thinking process. And I also cycle between digital sparing and offline dialogue, because it's really also about recalibrating my compass. So it is a mixture of different services. It is a mixture of online and offline, and it is a dialogue. I mean, even when using the machines, I really try to establish a dialogue where I should reflect before I answer, which means that I'm still in the loop instead of just getting presented to the result. And it takes much more time than getting the quick answer, but it really also improves the quality. I might spend half an hour of getting an answer, even from those the fast and efficient services, but I'd much rather spend half an hour of really thinking it through together with an efficient service, instead of just going for what really doesn't serve me.
For you both, if we want to build a genuine infrastructure of trust between humans and advanced technology, what is the single most vital rule of engagement we must establish when interacting with generative interfaces?
I would say that my rule would be, remember, it's just a machine. It's an advanced, it's a useful, it's an impressive machine, but it's still just a machine. It doesn't have judgment, it doesn't have responsibility, it doesn't have understanding in the human sense. It calculates the statistically significant answer, which can be extremely valuable, but that should not be mistaken for authority. So we should use AI with both curiosity and cool-headedness, not as an oracle, not as a colleague in the human sense, but as a tool that can extend our thinking if we continue to think ourselves. Because the machine can answer, but the human must answer for it. Yeah. So, I mean, AI allows us to do things that we couldn't do before. It allows us to do it much faster, and it gives us speed. But it should never be what gives us direction. And reflecting on the answer that you gave before, Kaare, I mean, this is also a topic that I touch very much upon in my guide to prompting, where I call what you described hermeneutics. And I mean, I'm borrowing here heavily from the extended literature there is on methodology, on theory of science, where, one quote that you find in a lot of methodology books is, if you have an hour to solve a problem, use 50 minutes to understand what the problem is. That logic still applies. That logic is still critical. And that's something that, speaking from my lived experience as a professor, that humans still struggle with to learn. Yeah. Even if they have somebody who thinks of themselves as a good teacher. Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I'm really down the same path, but I'll put a few more words to it. So I agree totally with you, Just, that the machine is not an oracle. The machine is just a machine, and that machine is really a tool. But if we should put some more characteristics to it, you could also see it as an editor, but that editor really has an agenda. And if you say that this looks flawless, you're not that good off. But if you ask, what did that editor, what did that architect choose to leave out, then you're much better off. And really, if you stop being the automated passenger and step into the role of really the chief editor, you might have an assistant editor, but you're the chief editor. And that's really where you start creating your own digital reality. Yes, you're using a tool, but it's only a tool. You're the one in charge. And you're not being served by an oracle. You are, at the end of the day, maybe not an oracle, but you are the one directing the junior editor, the junior researcher, the junior whatever, the tool, but you're the one in charge. And you are to make your decisions and take your responsibilities and really live your life and be responsible for the choices that you make, including what tools you choose and what tools you don't choose, and how you also interact with human beings. And I'm tempted to also put that layer of security into this dialogue, because I mean, if you're served by a tool that is little by little drifting and you don't even know it, well, you're not that good off. And I could talk for hours about this, and I probably shouldn't, but you're responsible for the tools. You're responsible also for choosing the right tools, using them the proper way, making sure that you see that yellow light or that red light, because otherwise you're not that well off.
No, but just as a brief comment, I think, or maybe we could say that if the old line was that AI will make us all managers of our AI assistants, instead it made us into editors.
True. So very true.
Both of you, to close our circle of today's podcast episode, when leaders, creators, and professionals will finish to listen to this episode, what is the primary shift in consciousness you want them to experience when they open a search bar or chat interface later on today, for example? What they should pay attention, first of all?
I think they should remember their critical thinking. I think they should create some reflection. I think they should very much be in charge of doing their thing, using their tools, but only seeing it as tools. So they make their own choices. And I know it's so tempting to look at these services as oracles, but they really aren't. And to see what is there instead of looking for what is not there. And I think it's really about, I don't know if we call it, I'm as a Dane, I would translate it into seeing the holes in the cheese. I don't know if that makes sense in English, but really seeing what is not there in order to do your own reflection and your own choices.
If I should shorten what Kaare says, but I agree with, I would say that we should remember that the machine should be an engine. It shouldn't be a compass. So, I mean, I would say, what's the one cognitive shift here? Remember your own compass when you're going into it. Of course, this depends on what you're searching for. You're searching for where's the nearest grocery store. Fair enough. But if it's something more profound, yeah, like what should I vote? At the next election. If you're searching for that kind of information, then you should really remember that what you're getting is a lot of noise covering some signals that other people selected for you. Yeah. There was a Danish study who did that, asked ChatGPT 100 times, what should I look for? Or was it 1,000? I forget, but a significant number of times. And it rarely answered the same party twice, but it did favor certain parties over others. And there were some parties that were never mentioned. One of the parties that were never mentioned was a party called the Left. which is a right-wing liberal party, and maybe it didn't get mentioned because ChatGPT couldn't get its head around. If you're a right-wing party, why do you call yourself the left? Come on, guys. Maybe they have a structural challenge in the new geo world, you know? I don't know. But I think, I think we should always, coming a little back, if I just elaborate on what I said before, we can get answers from the machines, but with humans, we have to answer for how we use those machines. We should really not make the rookie mistake of abdicating that responsibility. There is a case which came out, a news story which came out this week about a leading Danish daily where they had a journalist and he apparently used AI. And he thought he was, attaching an article and saying, use some quotes from this article. He claims he forgot to make the attachment, and the instruction was use quotes from this article. Instead of the AI prompting, answering, I think you forgot to attach an article, it simply made up some quotes, and that went into print. Now, 2 months later, somebody discovered the people that you're quoting in that article, they don't exist. They're made up, And this journalist, he's been sent home on leave, and right now his other articles are being reviewed. And if they just find the slightest problem in his other articles, well, he's out of a job. And I think, poor guy. But the thing where I lose a bit for him is there was, I think, an interview with him where he says, "But I didn't make a mistake. The AI did." Yeah, yes, the AI made a mistake. But you're the guy that forwarded this to your boss and said, "Here's my story, boss." So you kind of have to take responsibility for that. So remember your accountability when you're using AI. You can't outsource that. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely, categorically.
There's so many examples down that path. I shouldn't talk for too long, but one of my favorite examples is that the computer manufacturer and phone manufacturer and so on, Apple, well, choosing the name of a fruit for that kind of product, not such a wise decision if at least you want a machine to understand what you're dealing with.
But it began with the letter A, Kaare, so they got first in the phone book.
True, and they're still here. And I mean, you were talking about the journalist getting in a bad position. There have been numerous cases. The international consulting company Deloitte also had a problematic case where they were charging millions for making a report that should be the fundament of decisions, and it turned out that there were too many AI hallucinations. And so there are people being fired for this. There are organizations losing their good reputation because of not handling this properly. And I shouldn't go into the details of the Deloitte case. You can do your own research, but I mean, they used to have a high standard, and now at least there are some scratches in that surface. So it really does have consequences, and it's so important to do things properly. We are responsible for our choices, including the choices that are supported by machines.
Definitely. Thank you, both of you, because you highlighted so very well and so clearly this part, section, whatever, in regards to AI, because still, as you also mentioned many times, both of you, but mainly used today in this episode, that responsibility plays such a huge part within this area of using AI, guys. It's never less or more. You just have it, that you have to be responsible in so many parts of it, not just thinking about it. Okay, I have to be responsible, but really truly become responsible. Okay, there is a difference between the dreaming and reality, thinking and illusions, and etc. Thank you so very much for today, guys. Thank you, both of you. It was really full of informations, fresh informations and updates. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too.
Well, thank you for having us.